We may begin.
Dear friends, we are going to start with our next panel. Please, attention for us. Please take your seats. We are going to start with our next panel. Thank you. So, my name is Gülmihri Aytaç. I'm hosting today's panel. And I would like to briefly explain why I am here today. In 2024, I ran for the Austrian National Council as a candidate of the Liste Gaza Voices Against Genocide. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My goal was to take action against the genocide in Gaza. My goal was to break the silence and the ignorance surrounding it, and to articulate the unspeakable, to bring the discussion into the political arena, and my goal was to gain the necessary public attention for it. Liste Gaza, Voices Against Genocide, received 0.4% of the vote in the election. For all of us, Liste Gaza was a symbolic act, an act of resistance to the silent complicity of the Austrian government in supporting Israel's crimes. And our efforts continue. And today's event is a consequence and further development of that. Thank you, but be nice. Thank you. As an educational scientist, I know language matters. And the language in which we speak about violence, in which we speak about genocide, shapes our ability to resist it. And I know silence never protects the victim. Silence protects the system that continues and perpetuates violence. Today, we confront that silence. And what happens when silence lasts too long? Genocide. This term is not just legally complex, it is morally charged, historically wounded, and politically contested. It is a heavy legacy, and it continues to haunt us. A term that demands to take responsibility for the future. Yet, we must speak it, because genocide refers to crimes that do not only destroy bodies, it destroys also memory, language, belonging. It destroys all what it means to be human. And I warmly welcome you all to the panel. From ethnic cleansing to genocide, is one democratic state still possible? This is a big question. A question that is not easy, not comfortable, and not without consequences. Perhaps this question is hopeless, but asking it, that is not naive. Three voices, each carrying the weight of survival, of history and truth, will guide us through the complexities of what is at stake. Professor Ilan Pappé, historian and author, Dr. Ghada Karmi, exiled author and doctor, and Dr. Ramzy Baroud, journalist, chronicler, survivor. I thank you for being here. Listening today is not easy, but it is necessary, because those who only recognize genocide once it is over have failed in their responsibility. A just state may seem impossible today, but our actions today lay the foundations for tomorrow's hope. Today, we can choose truth over silence. Today, we can choose action over indifference. And today, we can choose to take a stand. With that, I now hand over to our moderator, Peter Eisenstein, who is Deputy Chief of the Norwegian Peace and Justice Party. And I thank you all, and I thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all for coming here. Before we begin, I'm going to make two short announcements. One is at 6 o'clock, right after this session, dinner will be available. Also, for those who are speakers, please remain here right after the session at 6. You'll get dinner too, but we have to have a little meeting before dinner. So with that, we can begin with this part of the program, which is from ethnic cleansing to genocide. We're talking about being a question that is not naive, but as of this morning, it's also a little bit out of date. Not only is it going from ethnic cleansing to genocide, but now also nuclear brinkmanship and possible nuclear holocaust just in the past few hours. So with that, I'd like to ask Dr. Ghada Karmi to speak. We're not going to have the pult up here anymore because it got in the way of some visuals.
Thank you. As I understood it, I thought we're speaking about the one-state solution, aren't we? Yeah, sure. Given the context is what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, hello everyone again. I think anyone who knows anything about me, anyone who knows anything about me will know that I have been writing about the one state in Palestine since before the 1990s. And I've really written extensively about the one state idea because I believed it then, and I believe it now, that this is the only endpoint, way forward for the situation we are in. That is, let's face it, the situation we are in is that we have an area from the river to the sea in which two communities live. One Palestinian Arab, the other Israeli Jewish. That's a fact. So the question really is, what do you do with this de facto one state? You know, and I know, that it's an apartheid state. It's one in which one side, the Jewish-Israeli side, is in charge, in control, and to the detriment of the Palestinian Arab community. Those are all facts. There's nothing there that's an opinion. That's a fact. So the question is, when you're faced with that, what do you do? What do you do? I mean, clearly, you know, there are a number of answers to this question. One answer has been that we look to a two-state solution, and which is, you know, come back again on the agenda. But let's go back to the actual situation. In the actual situation, there are, as I say, these two communities, one dominant over the other, and that cannot be allowed to happen. So in my estimation, there is only actually one way forward in which you can move from a situation in which one side is dominant over the other to a situation in which people are living together, and they can only do that in a democratic framework in which people have equal citizenship, equal rights, irrespective of what their ethnic, religious, racial origins might be. That's the issue. Now, I have always believed that, not out of sentimentality, believe you me, because I have to be blunt here. I'm telling you, if the Palestinians could reverse the clock to before 1948, they would do it in a heartbeat. We must be under no illusion that this is something that was forced, imposed on the Palestinians. They, I think, probably would not have chosen the people who are now dominating them. They would not have chosen for these people to be their compatriots. But they really don't have a choice. This is how it is. And I have seen it in this purely practical light, that what you have is two communities, and you have to reconcile the rights of the Palestinian people, which means the return of all the Palestinians to their homeland, because that's where they belong. You have to reconcile that absolute right with the fact that there is a settler community living in the homeland. It's a settler community, whether the sons or the grandsons or whatever, majority are settlers. There are those who've come from Arab countries, they're also settlers. So I think we need to be clear that excluding the small number of indigenous Palestinian Jews who are Palestinians, the rest are settlers and the children of settlers. So if you're just looking at this purely pragmatically, what can you do? How are you going to sort this out? It seems to me entirely sensible, and it's the only way forward, in which you forget about the fact that these are settlers. Irrespective of how they came to Palestine, they're there. They are present. So they need a solution. And therefore, to my mind, the fairest and most practical way is for the current situation to continue, i.e. one state between the river and the sea, but not the one-state arrangement now in which one community dominates the other, but converted into a democracy in which everybody has equal rights and equal citizenship. Now that is... And quite frankly, I can think of no other arrangement that would satisfy human rights and human decency, so that even if the Palestinians could, they would not murder the settlers and fling them out and expel them as the Palestinians were expelled in 1948. They wouldn't do that. And they would not, at the same time, imagine that there would be a future without these people. So in reality, that's the way it is, and that's the way it's got to be. Now, however, I don't have to tell you, there are problems in the way of all this. Chief among them is the two-state illusion, in which the idea is that you legitimize colonialism by dividing the country of Palestine into two, one composed of the settlers and the other composed of the indigenous Palestinian inhabitants. But the thing about the two-state solution, which always gets me, is quite apart from whether you agree with it or not, I mean, how do you justify dividing the country so unequally? I mean, even if you accept that you need to have two states, why is it 20% to the Palestinians, the indigenous people, and 80% to the settlers? How is that? You know, what does that mean? However, you know and I know that that is the two-state paradigm that's been pursued by the West and by the Arab states and by some of the Palestinians themselves. So that's the fact. Now, what are the obstacles in the way of my idea? It's very obvious, isn't it? Even before the genocide, the two communities don't like the idea of living together. The Jewish Israelis look down on Palestinian Arabs. They consider them lesser human beings. They don't want to live with them in any sort of equality. They want to continue living as they have been, in a supremacist position where they enjoy all the advantages and very few of the disadvantages. So that's one. The other community, the Palestinian Arab community, does not wish to live with their usurpers, and today does not wish to live with people who have committed genocide against them, the murderers, the mass murderers, and the enthusiasts for mass murder, which we heard about in those opinion polls, that a very large majority of the Israeli Jewish population supports the genocide. So the idea that the Palestinian Arab community would welcome or tolerate living together with people like this is very hard to stomach. So I don't underestimate the difficulties in the way. Well, that's bad enough. But if you add to it the determination of the West to keep Israel going, then you really have a huge problem. Because the whole idea of the two-state solution, no matter where you put the dividing line, preserves the Israeli state. And the West, from my observation, the last thing it will do is to tolerate the disappearance of the state of Israel. And I quickly assure you, we're not talking about killing people, we're talking about the state. And the West cannot tolerate that. And that's something, alas, we don't have time to go into, but we have ideas about why Western official position is to keep Israel going no matter what. So even if you throw a bone to the Palestinians in the shape of the 20% of their original homeland, as long as you can keep Israel in its present form with a Zionist Israel, is all that the West really requires. They will fight against the one-state idea almost as much, or perhaps more, for all I know, than the way the communities themselves feel about each other. So this really is a problem. And, I sometimes think to myself that earlier I was raising this issue which has bothered so many of us. Why do Western states support Israel so much since October 7th, 2023? What is this? The fact that a conference like this has to take place, has to take all sorts of precautions in case they're stopped. What is this protection towards Israel? What's it about? And quite apart from what I think Ilan spoke about, which is that it's seen very much as a part of Europe, it's a part of the West. But almost more than that, I often feel they can't bear to look in the face the fact they made a huge blunder by creating Israel. And therefore, if Israel is to disappear, it would be an indictment of their support, their desire to create this monster in the Middle East. And they can't face it. So in my last remarks, Number one, practically, in practical terms, when the state is set up, there will be huge difficulties. Even if the two communities were in agreement, there'd be very big difficulties. First, the Jewish law of return, that would have to be stopped completely. The Jewish law of return. Until the Palestinian refugees and exiles were repatriated, there is no room for a Jewish law of return. So there's that. Secondly, there's a period of adjustment, very important. Don't forget that there is a huge difference in terms of advancement between the two communities. So there has to be a period in which the Palestinian side is allowed to come up to catch up with the Jewish Israelis, and other things like that. And then finally, of course, is this just hot air now? Is it hot air? Because of the genocide, because of the way that the Israeli population, not only the government, has been revealed as being fundamentally racist and violent. Because don't forget, Israel has a citizen army. What does that mean? It represents people in Israel. It's not something that flew out of Mars. It's part of society. So these people engaged in the mass murder, this is really very, very tough. And I can tell you, last summer, I was in Jordan, and I gave a talk about the one-state solution. And you cannot imagine the opposition there was and the constant cry of how dare you expect us to live with these people? We are not prepared to. There's only either them, us, or them. We have to get rid of them, or, they'll get rid of us. It's that sort of idea. And of course, you can understand it. People are very angry. So my conclusion is, we must not let this particular time, which is really tough, to cloud our judgment in terms of the long-term aim of what we're trying to do. The one state is the only equitable and humane solution for the dreadful mess created by Israel. It's the only humane solution, and we need to aim towards it. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but as long as it remains the guiding final endpoint for us, we will work towards it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Karmi. Now we will hear from Professor Ilan Pappé, who is, I think, single-handedly responsible for most of the anti-Zionists in the world today.
Thank you. Thank you. You do? Thank you. It's too kind. I want to echo some of the words that Rada, or some of the kind of reference that Rada had to the very idea of the discussing now, the one state. And it seems quite sensible that at a time when the genocide still goes on in Gaza and the ethnic cleansing goes on in the West Bank, the mood, the willingness, the impulse to talk about reconciliation, living together, even within decolonized Palestine, not within, of course, the paradigm of the two-state solution, is not a very attractive topic now. And I experienced the same thing that you did, Rada, when I was trying to talk about the one state. We don't want to hear about it now. This is not the right time. And we all, I think, fully understand why there is no patience. On the other hand, I also agree with Rada. That doesn't mean that we have to forsake long-term processes and understand them and prepare for them. Probably the solution for this tension between the one hand being totally sensitive to the unwillingness of people, especially in Palestine, especially Palestinians, to talk about any kind of solution, even the word solution, seems to antagonize, and rightly so, a lot of people. And on the other hand, you can't ignore the basic fact that Rada has mentioned. There will be 8 million Jews in the future in a decolonized Palestine, whether people like the idea or don't like the idea. I think one of the ways of navigating through this is to make sure that the discussion about the future has few principles that I think we should respect and maybe would help us still to keep the activism, the conversation, while of course I think our energy as a whole, as human beings, as individuals, as movement, are now rightly focused on stopping the genocide, not about having huge gatherings of hundreds and hundreds of people to talk together about a better future. We need the masses of people, we need the energy of people, we need to give people hope that they have the ability to influence the reality that would be one in which the genocide stops and so on. So maybe the venues should be a bit more limited. Maybe the conversation should be a bit more in the written world rather than in the public domain and so on. And for that kind of conversation, which I think needs special venues now, special efforts, because anyway, building a movement for a one-state solution, as many of you I know are working with me on the ground in Palestine know, is a very slow process. Hardly we make any pathway into the Jewish community, and even talking with Palestinians on the ground, even before the 7th of October, we didn't create immediately a massive popular movement, although people were much more willing, of course, to discuss the one state before the 7th of October. So here are some pointers which I would like to suggest. And again, I think the conversation does not need huge public audiences, mass movements. I think it needs to be continued, I agree. It needs to be articulated and so on. The first pointer for me, which is very important, and which will be exactly an antithesis to what characterized the so-called peace process that the Americans and the Europeans have been conducting for years and are even talking about it as in the language of them today, of the day after. The Palestinians have to lead the conversation about the future of Palestine. Nobody else. It needs to be a Palestinian conversation. The Palestinians, whoever will decide to do this conversation, whether they will change the organization of the PLO, whether they will create a new organization, doesn't matter. Whatever would be the organizational structure, because we don't want it just to be conversation between individuals. We want it to be a vision for the national liberation movement. They can decide how much would they involve Jewish partners, whether from Israel itself or outside, on certain aspects of the future. But the pointer of having the Palestinians being in a driving seat means that you turn, which is fine, which I think psychologically is very important, you turn, and that settles the settlers issue to my mind, you turn the Jewish community either inside Israel today or in historical Palestine, and the Jewish communities which are still interested in it outside, into part of the solidarity movement, not part of the people who determine the future, but people who are lending their moral, political, economic support for whatever the Palestinians would tell us they would imagine as a much better reality. And yes, possibly it could open a critical discussion if that vision, for instance, would say, well, all of you guys, 8 million, will not be there. But I don't hear that much of impracticality from, even at the moment of outrage now, people are still practical about it. The second pointer, which I think is very important, one of the greatest success of Zionism, with the help of European colonialism, was to take Palestine out of the Mashriq, of the Eastern Mediterranean. As if development in Syria and Lebanon, in Jordan, this whole colonial project that the Europeans built in the First World War, that is collapsing in front of our eyes. It is collapsing, not just in Israel. That as if this are two different geographical spaces, two different problems. No, I think it would be very important to have a discussion about the future that includes the future of the Eastern Mediterranean, at least as a whole, if not of the whole Arab world. But let's start with the Eastern Mediterranean. And that gives options. That gives options for both the Jews who came from the Arab countries and even Jews who are from a European descendant and would want to stay in a decolonized Palestine. They would not be, you called it tribalism, rather, but they will not be the only people in the Eastern Mediterranean that would like to be recognized as an ethno-cultural group. You have the Maronites, you have the Yazidis, you have the Druze. The Jews can be an ethno-cultural group if they want to, which is not a national group by no means, and it does not a group that has a position of dominance. But if it is a mosaic, as it used to be, the Eastern Mediterranean used to be a mosaic of groups, and many people, I still think, want to preserve some of this group identity. I'm talking about the Eastern Mediterranean as a whole. Yes, there could be, and by the way, there was a Jewish identity that did not only did not alienate the other groups, was in a very good relationship. Read Osama Magdisi's beautiful book, The Genuine Coexistence, before 1948. The Jews were just another ethno-cultural group in a mosaic of ethno-cultural groups that were part of the Arab world, were part of the Muslim world. So another pointer is this kind of looking at the discussion not just between the river and the sea, but to look at around it and not to look for solutions in the European supermarket of ideas, but rather going back in history to the legacy, to the heritage that in Palestine, for instance, we know about how Jews, Muslims, and Christians coexisted before the arrival of Zionism and the colonialism. The third, and with this I still have a few minutes, right? The third pointer, I think, and it's not urgent, but I think it's part of a very helpful discussion of keeping the consultation about the future alive, even when your attention, rightly so, is totally focused on the now and the here and the now. For example, a Palestinian conversation, nobody else's, Palestinian conversation of whether there is or isn't a distinction between the settlements that Israel built after 1967 in the West Bank and the Jewish settlements that were built throughout the mandatory period and after the establishment of the State of Israel. Now, we are being told by international jurists that you cannot deal with the Jewish communities that were built before 67, as if they are part of the legitimate Israel. But when we are talking about decolonization and not peace agreement, but the right term is decolonization, you open up everything. And that doesn't mean, as you said, it doesn't mean expulsion of people, it doesn't mean extermination of people, but it does mean discussing distribution of land, distribution of resources, ownership, and building a country in a vision that goes along with the liberation movement rather than with diplomats and politicians from the outside. And finally, and I think that is something that is very clear, there are two processes happening, and I think sometimes we confuse the two processes. One is the process of disintegration of Israel, which is happening without us. We are not the reason the Jewish society implodes from within. not one of us sitting here, is responsible for the fact that Israel is going through a civil war, which has nothing to do with the Palestinians, unfortunately. It's just between secular Judaism, as they would call it, and more orthodox Messianic Judaism. It tears this society apart. And all the attempt to use the war, whether the genocide in Gaza, now the war against Iran, is not helping to create a cement between the two societies. And in fact, one society already lost, if not 500,000, in fact, more than 500,000 of its members who have already left Israel since the 7th of October. That's the economic elite of Israel, that's the cultural elite of Israel, and many more are leaving. And the prospect of a long war with Iran is not going to stop this emigration. It's going to increase that emigration for people who have dual nationality or have jobs that can ignite easily outside. Why should they live in a constant fear that they are part of a theater of war if they have German nationality, if they have American nationality? And this is going to go on, and this would break down this regime from within in a long term. I'm not talking about tomorrow or the day after. But that means that the other process is the process of thinking what will happen when the disintegration will reach a critical point and creates a void. What happens if the Palestinian national movement is not ready to fill the void when the void appears? This is something that happened in history. When you had colonial regimes disintegrate and there was not yet readiness to take over, that's why some of the post-colonial regime we have in some parts of the world are not much to write home about in the sense of what kind of states were built and what kinds of societies emerged out of it. And therefore, and with this I will end, the call for Palestinians today to answer the question, how do you see the future of millions of Jews in post-colonial Palestine? How do you see the Jewish settlements? How do you see any connection to the Mashreq and so on? The call for such discussion and answer to these questions is not for the sake of the Jews of Israel. It's for the sake of making sure that, as I'm saying it as an historian, that disintegration and collapse is a bit like these sand clocks that you have. It starts very slowly, but the last bits, look at every case study you have in history. The last bits are speedy, are very quick. And sometimes people are not at all ready for that because it happens, I won't say in one day, that would be too dramatic. But the pace of the last bit of the collapse is much faster than the beginning of the collapse. And therefore, it is good to be there with ideas, not just for the sake of how Jews and Arabs would live together, but what is the future of post-colonial Palestine is probably even a better discussion than the one state. It's rather saying, let's not talk for the movement of one state and talk about the movement for post-colonial Palestine, post-Israel Palestine, call it what you want. But one that says we are discussing, we are not only discussing, we are even imagining. We are even imagining. Ask writers, ask poets, ask film writers, right now, in this moment of despair, to imagine how post-Israel Palestine would look like, even as an ideal type, even if you romanticize it, to give people also a sense that we know what we are dreaming about, not only what we are fighting against. Thank you.
So, our final speaker today, speaking of Palestinians and the need for them to tell their own stories, it's also important that they find their audience. And our final speaker, Dr. Ramzy Baroud, found that audience through the Palestine Chronicle, which he created as, believe it's the first online Palestinian paper and platform. So it's a wonderful way to combine the two, Palestinian stories with a new audience, which has been going on now, finding new generations of people learning about the Palestinian story. Dr. Baroud.
Thank you very much. First of all, just a quick disclaimer. I haven't slept for 2 days. I lost my luggage. Just arrived 2 hours ago, so I'm very cranky. So if I say something that, so this message, the target audience is Ghada and Ilan. Don't get upset with me if I seem to disagree with certain things. I'm not going to speak as a Palestinian. I'm going to speak as a Gazan. And I think it's important. Despite the fact that I constantly speak about the need for a unified Palestinian discourse and a Palestinian discourse that is managed and created by the Palestinians themselves, but not by any Palestinians, by Palestinian organic intellectuals and by the Palestinian people who are the true representative of Palestinian society. So not any Palestinian suffices. Don't go and bring Mahmoud Abbas or some ambassador to some whatever and say, here's a Palestinian, he speaks on behalf of the Palestinians. Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority does not speak on the behalf of the Palestinian people. Like your society, like any other society, we have classes, we have our bourgeois, we have our people who are living in their own, fantastical lands, and, they have their own intellectualism and their own frame of mind, and they don't necessarily always line up with those living in Jabalia right now, in Khan Yunis, in Beit Hanun, in Beit Lahia, in Nusayrat, in Maghazi, or anywhere in Gaza. This is why I want to speak as a Gazan first, before I speak as a Palestinian. Identity is so extremely important to this conversation. We can't talk about coexistence unless we know who we are as a people. As you know, Israel bombed Iran against international consensus on the issue, and they are trying to provoke a major destructive war so that Netanyahu and his ilk may stay in power until the next elections. That's how important the likes of Ben Gvir and Smotrich are supposedly to the future of the Middle East. Yet somehow, and for some reason, the Jordan, Pakistan, and other Arab and Muslim countries are lining up their defenses to intercept any possible Iranian retaliation. Not Israeli attacks, but Iranian retaliation. So it's kind of hard to imagine me as a Gazan whose family, half of my family have perished, and I'm not going to talk about it into more details because I don't want to get emotional and I don't want to get marginalized from the conversation for being emotional, but I lost over 100 members of my family, and that's that. To talk about coexistence right now, it's not that I am angry, that I am unable to control my emotions for the moment, but I can't see the future beyond this emotional, this kind of overwhelming emotions that one feels when his family is not only half dead, but also starving and dying in refugee camps. When I look at the history of Israel and the history of Zionism, it has never been the history of solutions. Never. The word solution is our own invention. When we talk about solutions, it's something that Arabs and Palestinians have been chasing after before the establishment of Israel on the ruins of Palestine in 1948. It's us who's been chasing after the British and after the League of Nations and the United Nations. It's us who's been begging and pleading, and the Zionists have given us nothing. Not even the mere interest of an actual solution. Nothing. We have been playing a one-sided game regarding solutions, and it is, with time, has become a form of intellectualism. Just a little side note here. In his book, Notes from Prison, Antonio Gramsci talks about when the Jacobin movement, there was a revolution, I think 1868 in Europe, I can't remember exactly when. But the Jacobin movements, they were surprised because they had calculated that the revolution is going to happen exactly at a certain point when there is enough, class struggle and they created this whole edifice of text Yet the revolution happened in France completely on its own. And as a result, the Jacobins couldn't accept that revolution is genuine. Peasants, workers, students leading their own revolution, to the point that they had to kind of rethink, is this a genuine revolution or not? It didn't fit into their own frame of reference in what Gramsci refers to as intellectualism. And I don't want to be engaged in intellectualism. I want to be looking at the reality as it is now. Because my target audience is my people. My target audience right now is Gaza. 99% of my target audience is Gaza, and 1% everyone else. It's all about Gaza. I have always argued that Gaza is the heart and the center of Palestinian history, not because it has land or resources, it has none and very little, but because Gaza has always been the beating heart of Palestinian resistance. And this is our real assets as Palestinians. This is where the story begins. And that's where the story will end, with the defeat of Zionism. I strongly believe that Gaza alone, over the course of 600 plus days, have defeated more of Zionism than all of our efforts combined for the last century. And I know we are very limited to the kind of conversation we can have in Vienna or in Paris or in Berlin. We are very limited. There's so much of the conversation we can't openly speak about because of certain limitations and certain fears. If that conversation is to open up so candidly one day, there is so much we can say about this subject. But this little tiny stretch of land of 2.3 million people, out of which 10% are already gone, has managed to impose Gaza as the most important geopolitical aspect of the entirety of the Middle East, if not even globally. It is changing the dynamics of the Middle East. It's introducing new players and exposing old players. Who has ever thought that Ansarullah, the so-called Houthis, would ever be playing such a central role? These are people, and I've reported about Yemeni solidarity with Palestine for many, many years, and nobody was paying attention. Yemeni media would run my articles, but other Arab media wouldn't. There was always something about Yemen that made it extremely special in the history of the Palestinian struggle. These are the conversations. These are the conversations we need to be talking about. Who has ever thought that Namibia is going to rise as one of the top solidarity places anywhere in the world? Unearthing their own genocide by the Germans against the Herero people 100 years ago, and coming now to the platform and say, what about us? We are like those Palestinians, and they try to sue Germany at the International Criminal Court. These are the opportunities that we need to explore and exploit, and this is the kind of unity we need to build. I think the idea has never been truly about solutions, because you can't create a solution with another side that is never even interested in any form of solution, just or otherwise. You look at the Israeli discourse regarding the Palestinians. How many websites and pages and books and documents and brochures and flyers we have created of what Zionist leaders have been saying about Palestinians since the very, very beginning. The cockroaches, the animals, the beast, all of that. Now, the Gaza genocide is just the culmination. It's just the translation of this racist, nasty, dehumanizing discourse coming to the form in one final blow that is of the extermination of the Palestinian people. I am not interested in any solution with that group of people. What I'm interested in defeating Zionism. And this is why I think that the title of this conference is spot on, anti-Zionist. That's where we should be approaching the issue. Look at any successful national liberation struggle anywhere in the world. Rarely they spoke about resolutions or solutions. The Vietnamese fought, the Algerians fought, the South African fought. Yes, they had a vision, and we need to talk about this vision. Yes, they did. But it's not the vision that is the tool we are going to take to this war. As if Netanyahu is just waiting for Ramzy or someone else to come and say, hey, I have this perfect solution that's going to make everybody happy. Well, Ramzy, what are you waiting for? Come on, let's talk about it. Absolutely not. We have to change the dynamics of the relationship totally before we talk about solutions. And by the way, I mean, I know international law hasn't really lived up to the expectations. But international law already says that Israel is an illegal occupier of Palestine. And they are already discussing and investigating the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And they have already issued arrest warrants of Israeli war criminals. And even other Western countries, as hypocritical as they have been, they are sanctioning Israeli leaders and so forth and so on. So we already have enough body of text to imagine what international law wants from Israel. You in the military occupation, you dismantle, you apartheid, you end the genocide, you are held accountable for your crimes. International law already says these things. Add all of these things together, and here's your solution. Once you defeat Zionism, and that should be our absolute focus, once you defeat and expose Zionism, and it is being exposed and defeated, and by the way, I think these attacks on Lebanon and Iran is just an act of desperation. I think Netanyahu knows that his days are numbered, and he is trying to ignite. He is the master of distraction. And he keeps putting on a show over here and a show over there. But at the end of the day, he cannot break Gaza. And I said from the very beginning, Gaza will never be broken because Gaza is not about weapons. This whole idea, this whole ridiculous idea that Palestinians need to give up their arms. How do you even count the arms of the Palestinians? They make their own bombs and their own guns underground. It's not an army with a number of tanks and airplanes. It's a people's army. It's a people's resistance. And under no circumstance will Gaza be defeated. And the strange thing about all of this is that Netanyahu himself has figured this out. Moshe Feiglin has already figured this out. They all figured it out from the beginning, and that's why they decided that the enemy is the Palestinian people, because they knew there is no resistance without the Palestinian people. So they launched a war on the Palestinian people, not because they were not being careful, or this was disproportionate, or it's too much collateral damage, we can't deal with this. It was intentional. From the very, very beginning. No food, no water, no medicine. It was a genocide. So let's go back to the basics. The basics are Israel is not interested in solutions. The Palestinian people have figured this out and they put it all on the line and they are fighting and we need to stand in solidarity with them. Yes, we should have visions for the future, but the visions should always be focused on one state solution, a state called Palestine, and nothing else.
So, thank you very much to all three of the panelists. I have a couple of dozen questions myself, but I will control myself and let you ask questions. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand.
You were first, sir. I want to remind you to please keep it short, keep it safe. Thank you. I will snatch that mic away from you. And Dalia and myself will be holding the microphone. Thank you.
It is not easy to speak after you so very powerful words, but I will try. I think if we want to get rid of Zionism, and I thought this is the aim of all this, we should stop to speak about two peoples. Because the Zionist establishment is oppressing all the people from the river to the sea, and it includes all the population with different degrees of oppression. And the oppressor has different degrees of oppression and being oppressed. There are oppressors who are oppressed, and there are different degrees in this. And I think it's very important to stop to speak about two peoples, and if we can do this, it will be very much easier to speak about one land for the whole population.
Thank you. Yes.
Tony Greenstein, I think everybody here agrees on a one-state solution. The question is how we get there. And I want to quote a famous American black gay activist, James Baldwin, when he said, "The West does not support Israel because of this, it wants a salvation, a Jewish interest, it does it for the salvation of its own interests." And I think that's extremely important. We make the mistake, I think, of seeing Israel, the self-described Jewish state, as therefore depending on Jewish support. I want to argue that Jews are the moral alibi for Western support of Israel. Even if no Jewish people outside Israel supported Zionism, the West would still continue to support it. And therefore we have to also look at the region, because the Arab regimes are complicit and collaborating in what is happening today, the genocide and all the rest of it. So I think we need to refocus our attention on why Israel is supported. And it is quite simply, Israel is the projection of Western interest into the Arab region. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello. Thank you. My question is, so I find it much easier to try to imagine what the Western world would look like or would need to look like for a one-state solution, because I think this is a place where we can we can be better allies, and we can try to work towards it, because West obviously has an enabling factor. So this is one question. What should, in this one-state solution where Palestinians live in dignity, what should the geopolitics look like? What should Europe look like? What should the US look like? And the second question similar to it is that, so in order to make sure that the children of today will question their parents, for example, here in Austria or in Germany especially, but also in the wider Europe, and will be angry with them when they find out their positions, in order to make that happen, what should we be doing? I mean, I personally would love to think about this. And final note, I actually also think that, I mean, this is a hunch, I'm no historian and I should study this, but I have this hunch that there are two things in history that could help personally me. I'm from Turkey.
Time.
One thing is the period between the end of the Holocaust and establishment of Israel for the Jews, and the second is actually the Crusades.
Yes, please keep your questions short and on point. Thank you.
I would more so like to add to the question of the gentleman who asked the first question of the suppression of all people between the river to the sea. I would kind of have to disagree on that because, question? No, then I'll.
Okay, yes, we would like, it's not an open discussion, just to remind you, we would like to ask the panel questions so they can answer.
Here. Okay, can I speak here from this side? Okay, my name is Attia. I come from Germany, from Stuttgart. We organized in the past many conferences about one democratic state. I know the idea is not easy to reach. If we look at the situation now, because all the area in the Middle East is destroyed, and I can understand the people in Jordan, like as they don't believe in the idea, because Israel destroyed all the area. Okay, I am believing in the one democratic state. That is not new, because the Palestinian talk about this solution since 50 years ago. But the idea should be not romantic. It should be practically. The idea, the ODS should have legs to work, because if we remain intellectually to talk about the idea, we will not reach our. I think without resistance, we cannot push or force Israel or force the Jewish people to go with, to make the idea possible. I think resistance is the main thing in the issue.
Thank you so much. Please, excuse me, I would just like to clarify something. This is, please ask your questions, so that the panel can answer. I am sorry that we have to be strict, but please, questions only. Don't discuss what somebody said in the... Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. This afternoon we heard about the imperialists made the international law. I'm very short. We have the extraterritorial human rights obligation, we have international laws, and I'd like to wonder from the plenum, we have an instrument we could use. What do you think about using this law? I give a shit about who made it, but we have the law and we should use it.
Okay, next question.
Ja, ich meine auch, dass der Weg ist, dass wir ein freies Palästina.
I want to ask you what you think about using the international law, or whether you think it was made by imperialists, part colonial times, a long time ago, or whether you should use it. I think we should use it. And my question is, what you think on the plenum here, how about this?
Thank you.
Ich denke, dass es notwendig ist, dass wir ein freies Palästina haben, in dem die ethnischen, religiösen Gruppen und so weiter zum gegenseitigen Nutzen zusammenarbeiten.
Ihre Frage wäre?
Die Frage ist denn das nicht alleine möglich in einem sozialistischen Staat? Was meinen Sie dazu?
Is there a possibility to have a one-state solution with both ethnic groups in a socialist state? Dalia, keep the mic in your hand.
Don't worry, I'll give it back to you soon. So my question is, maybe for Ilan in the first place, because you're a professor for history. do guys like you take actions and analyze school books? Because I'm from Germany, I know there's 1 million German teachers, and if you ask them, maybe let's say 1,000 of them might know one or two things that are anti-Zionist talking points. Most of them are convinced Zionism is a great answer to anti-Semitism. So this is my question. Do you analyze them, and what steps could we take to change it?
Please, for the people on the panel, thank you for your questions. Please tell us when you have enough questions. Okay, we'll take one more here.
Hello. I think we're all here in agreement that we have to do our part to undermine Zionism, its strength, its institutional capacity, etc. To Ramzy's point, do you see anti-Zionist Jews playing a role in the building of the Palestine national movement?
Thank you. Okay, next question. Finish with questions. Sorry, we're finished with questions. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you. So, okay, so when it comes to what I could understand as questions, I think we can begin with the question regarding international law. It was mentioned earlier today that international law no longer plays a role because Zionists have taken over and use it as a weapon against those who want to use international law itself. So, Professor Pappé, you'd like to?
First of all, historically, it's true. International law was the foundation for international law. Were established after the Second World War, when much of the world was still colonized, and the colonized people were not consulted in building the foundation for what is universal justice, what is international law. Some changes were introduced in 1960 to include colonialism as a violation of international law, but when at the same time certain jurists, including Palestinian ones, were trying to define settler colonialism as violations of international law, the United States, Canada, Australia, Apartheid South Africa, and Israel objected, and therefore settler colonialism was never defined as a violation of international law, and that's why it does not apply that well to the situation of Palestine. It can apply to certain violations during the occupation of the West Bank and so on, but it's not a tool of decolonization because it is part of colonialism in many ways. I think that what is important is that it had an opportunity, international law had an opportunity to re-win the confidence of the global South because of what happened in Gaza. They could have shined through and say, you know what, we understand that fundamentally there's something wrong with international law, and therefore we would not only ask for the end of the genocide in Gaza, we will ask for the end of Zionism. But they didn't have the courage to do this, and I can't see them having the courage to do this. So we need redefining what is universal justice, what is international law. The world needs international infrastructure of law, because otherwise you cannot deal with global warming, you cannot deal with global poverty. You need collaboration based on laws and regulation. The current ones are providing immunity to genocides like the one that Israel perpetrates in Gaza. And therefore, we have serious questions, not only about its effectivity, but about its legitimacy.
I just want to add one thing to what Ilan has said. First of all, we must keep international law. We have nothing else. And that applies to the United Nations. People are constantly saying, oh, it's no good and it's not whatever. We have to keep it. The problem really is that you can't impose it. That's the problem. It's that you can't implement it. You can pass indictments, you can do all of that, but you can't make it happen. That's the real issue. Even if we changed certain aspects of international law, that flaw remains.
Just a quick addition to what has already been said is that international law is not a fixed body of law that is consistent and it's implementable and it's practical and can be used in any time or space. International law is reflection of international power balances, and we fully understand that. What does it mean that this comes from the United Nations General Assembly versus the UN Security Council? What is binding, what is not binding. But the thing is, historically, international law has been a contested space between largely the global south and the global north. I mean, for example, look at the resolution, just an example, a resolution that describes Zionism as a form of racism. What are the roots of that law? Was it introduced by Britain? Was it introduced by France? It was introduced by the organization that was the precursor to the current African Union. It was the African countries, not even the Arab countries, the African countries that got together and they said the crime of apartheid in South Africa is linked to the crime of Zionism and what is happening in other African countries. And they created this body of text and they pushed it at the UNGA, and then the UNGA voted essentially by recreating the draft resolution that was created by African countries. And this is why I keep saying that we cannot leave any space uncontested. We can't just, of course, international law has failed Gaza, because if it's not able to stop the genocide, people trapped in a prison just running from north to south, south to north, and being just butchered in the most inhumane ways possible, and international law couldn't deliver anything, not even a cup of water or a loaf of bread. It's actually the American Humanitarian Foundation, so-called, that is providing aid and killing hundreds of Palestinians on a daily basis in exchange for that bread. So total failure, there's no question about it. But it doesn't mean that we abandon it. It means we fight for it. We claim it to our side. The likes of Francesca Albanese, the likes of Richard Falk, the likes of Mokheber, and the likes of so many other people who are fighting for the centrality and the morality of international law. Just one last thing I want to say about it, and I know I exceeded my time. Just Richard Falk said something really interesting to me. I interviewed him recently, and he said, Ramzy, I have been, he's as you know, one of the world leading international law experts and professors, and someone who worked at the UN and other international institutions for a long time. He said, never in modern history has a country ever won the war of legitimacy, the moral war, has ever eventually lost the war. And he said, you Palestinians are winning the legitimacy war hands down. It is only the matter of time before that the war of legitimacy and the war of morality that you are winning actually eventually becomes an actual tangible victory. That's how we want to use international law. And that's why we are fighting for international law. Not because we are stupid or ignorant of what international law has not done for Gaza, but because we are thinking of the possibilities of what it could do for Gaza.
And even though you did exceed your time, which we are all actually very grateful for, you did get a specific question about if you foresee a role for anti-Zionist Jews in a future Palestine. So,
absolutely. So, a group of Palestinian historians got together about a year ago, and they decided they want to put together like an encyclopedia of Palestinian history. So they started dividing the chapters. Ramzy, why don't you work about the history of Gaza? Ahmed, you work on this. Samira, you work on that. And then someone raised the point of, you know, the ancient Hebrews of Palestine. How do we qualify them in our history as Palestinians? And there was this kind of odd, awkward pause in which we kind of all looked at each other. And then someone said, it's Palestinian history. It's Palestinian history. They are part of our history. They are not alien to it. It just, for a second, that awkward pause related to the fact that we are being killed and slaughtered by a group of people who claim to speak on behalf of Hebrews and Jews. But in reality, the ancient Hebrews are part and parcel of the Palestinian DNA that goes back thousands of years. I think it's incumbent on the anti-Zionist Jews to reclaim that role as Palestinians. I know I am putting too much expectations on you here. I'm not trying to shift your identity or force you to think of yourself as someone else, but you have to approach it from that kind of idea that you are fighting for the coexistence with a group of people that you have already coexisted with. Not only in Palestine, not only in the Middle East, but as far as Al-Andalus for hundreds of years. I lived in Granada for a few months, and I lived in the house of a Jewish Arab man, a merchant, who had all of these Arabic writings all around his house. Later, I learned that it was the Jews of Granada that actually preserved the Arabic language. Because when the Arabs were pushed out in 1492, they were not allowed to use the Arabic letters anymore. So the Arab Jews were allowed to do so. And they preserved the Arabic language of Al-Andalus. We have so much in our history that is enough to tell us that we can, in fact, not only coexist, but represent a success story. But we have to separate between that kind of solidarity and the solidarity of replacement. I speak on behalf of myself. I don't need anybody to speak on my behalf. I'm not a liability to myself as a Palestinian. As Ilan put it, Palestinians should be taking the leadership on this subject. We need solidarity with us. We don't need replacement of the Palestinian voice. Just one quick thing. There's a sister who asked a question about Europe. What should Europe do? And this is it. I will not say anything after that. I think everything that you are doing is the right thing, honestly. The fact that you have students leading these mass protests in Europe, in the United States, losing their careers, their degrees, their diplomas, their futures, getting imprisoned, getting beaten. This is unprecedented. A lot of people say, well, it happened during the Vietnam era. No, it didn't. The Vietnam era was a completely different circumstance. The US, in their mind, was directly involved in that war. There is this new consciousness now among many Americans and many Europeans that their governments are no longer a third party, but they are very much involved in this. Do what you are doing. The boats that went to Gaza, the caravans that are going to Gaza, whatever you are doing, continue doing it, but remain unified. It is absolutely critical that you remain unified. Do not worry about accusations of anti-Semitism. Do not worry about defamation. All of this is meant for distraction. Stay as radical as you want. This is the time of being radical. If you come after the genocide and you pretend that you are radical, you're not radical. This is the time for radical language, radical action, radical discourse. It cannot...
Thank you. Ghada, would you like to say something, some final words on that? Or? Okay. We're finished up now. So do you have any final words? Final words.
Okay. Thank you to everybody who asked all the questions and raised very important points, but I'm told these have to be the final words. First of all, certainly on the subject of anti-Zionist Jews' role in Palestinian liberation, I mean, I would say that an unqualified yes, of course, But you see, one thing, though, that I think is very important, and I alluded to in my earlier talk, don't let it displace your very important work against Zionism itself. So, in other words, it can happen quite easily that your solidarity with the Palestinians, your concern for the Palestinians, sort of edges out the real job here. And the real job, in my view, is that Jews have to take the lead in anti-Zionism in its own right. And finally, I just clearly, as Tony said, I mean, clearly there are issues about how do you implement, how do you have the one state, things like that. It's very difficult to answer questions like this. The first thing you have to do in any political idea is you have to get it widely accepted. That's the first thing. So it is not, we are not in a situation where the one-state idea is very widely accepted. We're not. We need to work on that first. Now, there's a questioner who asked about two communities and stop talking about two communities. You see, the problem we have, and also partly to my friend Ramzy here, the question of solution and not solution. Look, you've got to look at the real situation. The real situation is there are two communities between the river and the sea. And one community is naturally the indigenous people, so we don't need to talk about them. But it's the other community that defines itself. It not only feels different, it maintains its difference by never settling down. It has never adjusted to life in the Middle East. It has never seen itself as of the Middle East rather than in the Middle East. And it has maintained its links to the outside, to the West, to Europe, to the United States. This is the type of community we have to deal with. And really, in talking about solutions and the one state, there is nothing idealistic in this. There is nothing that says, this is what we've always wanted. I am inviting people to face an actual, real problem. There's a problem on the ground. There are these two communities. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do with them? That's the answer. It's the answer to that question that I'm putting forward the one state. And as Ramzy said, why are we always putting forward solutions? The problem is, Ramzy, we've got the problem. They've pushed us into a position where we have a problem. We need to solve it. That's what I'm trying to say. And finally, just to my friend Ilan here, that's one of the reasons, you know, that the whole idea about seeing the Jewish community, the Israeli Jewish community, as melting at some point into the local scenery. I can't see that because you see the Crusaders. That was the thing about the Crusaders. They never gave up their links to the outside. They never saw themselves as part of the region. And I'm arguing, and this is the fact, that Jewish Israelis don't see themselves as part of the region either. They always maintain their links to the outside, and that's one of the reasons they'll never settle down. Anyway.
There was a question about textbook, and with this, which you ignored. I don't know why. Okay. It's not. Okay. But I'll do it quickly. I think it's an important question about German and Austrian textbook, but I think probably in many other places. Well, that is exactly the role, I think, of educators and academics, is to challenge the way we teach, we research, we educate people on Palestine. We have to change the dictionary that we use. We need to talk about the country Palestine. We need to talk about colonialism, settler colonialism, and all these terms that are not only a matter of opinion and moral position, but are actually accurate from an academic point of view. I think one of the things we are trying to do in universities more successfully in the English-speaking world than in the German-speaking world is to now be in a position where defining Zionism as settler colonialism, or Israel as an apartheid state, or the events of 1948 as ethnic cleansing is not anymore regarded as a political position, but rather as the outcome of a proper scientific research on that kind of issues. And I think Germany and Austria are they're lagging behind, of course. I don't see many academics here or in Germany are willing to accept, although I think they know that we are correct even from a scholarly point of view, not just from a moral point of view. As for the rest of the issue, I keep saying I do think we all, and Rada wrote about the one state, and Ramzy has written his own issues. I think we should continue writing about practical responses. I don't know if the word solution, I'm here a little bit with Ramzy on this, but practical responses for the main challenge. And you're right, the main challenge is you have 8 million Jews indoctrinated even in a worse way than the whites were indoctrinated during apartheid South Africa. It's anybody who's like me as an Israeli knows that the indoctrination in apartheid South Africa pales in comparison to what we went through as objects of indoctrination. And that explains very well the brutality and inhumanity in the Gaza Strip. There's a clear connection. Now, that's the point, rather, is not to try and talk to these people on their terms. The 8 million, you're right, will be there. Now, my guess, this is my guess, a very united, organized Palestinian liberation movement that has, hopefully after we finish we stop the genocide and honesty, and everything goes on right now. But the one that comes and says, you can live, it's up to the Palestinians to decide what they want to offer. You can either live as citizens, equal citizens, or if you want some sort of a collective cultural identity, you can have it, or whatever. I'm not saying what should be. My guess is that half, or at least 1/3 of the Israeli Jewish population would leave. They would not want to live in a non-apartheid supremacist Israel. It's not the end of the world. It's not a good enough reason not to envision this. That's why I think it's so important. You will remain probably with two groups of who now constitute what is called the Jewish society in Israel. Probably two groups. You will remain with people who, and that unfortunately would be the minority, but an important one, would say, you know what, this is the kind of country we want to live in. An Arab Palestine that recognizes us as human beings. Despite everything that happened in history, we move forward. And you will have people who don't have dual nationality or come from countries to which they don't really want to return. I won't mention them. And would stay out of necessity, not out of choice. Most of them, to my mind, would be from an Arab origin. And I still believe that they would find it better to live in an Arab state because so many of them are still oppressed and discriminated as Arabs, even if they are Jews today. And their only outlet out of this discrimination is racism towards the Palestinians. So there are certain dynamics that you can definitely change. And you know, I would finish with this. I was in South Africa in 2014. Every white person I met told me I was against apartheid. So I said, if you were all against apartheid, why did it take so long? I can imagine Jews, and I can tell it by my father-in-law, who has changed, Jews who would say to you after the liberation of Palestine, if they stay in Palestine, we were never Zionists. And this will happen, believe me. Thank you.